Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining our webinar. I'm Mike Hamilton, one of the members of the Area Planning and Services Committee on Aging with Lifelong Disabilities. And our presentation today is by Jennifer Moss. She is an experienced educator in grief support and end-of-life care and family communications. Since 2016, she has served as Outreach and Education Director for Bliley's Funeral Home in Richmond, providing grief education across the Commonwealth. Previously, she has worked a community outreach liaison for the Virginia Victims Compensation Program, educating communities on victims' rights. She also does presentations on grief support, funeral etiquette, obituary writing, legacy planning, and intergenerational communication for a wide variety of organizations. So, Jennifer, thank you for being here, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thanks, Mike. Hi, I am Jennifer Moss, and I'm with Bliley's. I do community outreach and education. Um, Full disclosure, my presentations are typically in person, and they're typically very interactive. And today, I'm going to kind of try to go back and forth in between and make this work for everybody who is watching from as a recording. Usually, I don't typically like to do a monologue presentation because people kind of fall asleep, but we'll see how far we can get today with keeping you guys awake and interactive. Let me share my screen to start with. Okay, sharing. So, today, what we're talking about is grief and loss. And I think that we typically get in, it's easy for us to think in terms of what grief is, in terms of my screen. Let's see, where are we now? Here we go. In terms of a loss is death. So typically what I like to do is say, let's think about this. And so everybody think for just a minute. If you feel like piping in, great. If not, I'm going to make the list here for us. But, what are some loss? What is a loss? A loss is a death. It could also be a divorce. See, I should never do this. Divorce. It could be the loss of a job. This could be loss of health. Any kind of changing type thing. I think it's just easy to think about loss in terms of death. But we grieve losses the same way with any of these things. What I see a lot of is this loss of health when I do a lot of these presentations with seniors, but with anyone who has had a diagnosis, has anyone who's had loss of hearing, loss of their hair. It could just be, your body's not functioning the same way, and you're changing and you're grieving kind of the loss of what you used to have versus what you thought you had. What I think everybody want to think about is I ask what is a loss, but then when you have any of the things up here, does anybody want to add any? I know we're not really doing any. Y'all are probably not want to, but anything of these losses that you want to add, just pipe in. But when you have a loss, oh, someone's waiting to come in. There we go. When you have a loss of some kind, there's also what's called the secondary loss. Okay, so what is a secondary loss? I think it's easy to think about, okay, when you have a death, you lose the person. But when you have a death or a divorce or loss of health or job, what are some other things that you lose in addition to that? And I think that those are things that are a lot of times overlooked. I think grievers get very surprised by these as to like what a secondary loss is. And I'll give you an example. I have all the answers, but I usually do this with you guys. But a secondary loss might be, so if you have a death, you might have a loss of future plans. You might have a monetary loss. You maybe whether you lost the breadwinner or if you lost your job, you might have a monetary loss. It might change what your plans are and what you thought you could do, and how you thought you could move through life and how you thought it was going to be. Um, Companionship, and this goes to that. Let's say you have a death and you lost your companion. Of course, that makes sense. You lost the person that you used to travel with, that you used to eat dinner with, all of those things. But also think about if you were a couple and you might have lost companionship, meaning you did everything with couples and now you're not a couple anymore. Or whether it's a divorce or any of the other things, or a loss of health, and you're not able to go and do the things that you used to do. So when you have a loss, a lot of times you get this secondary loss that really comes and smacks you in the face. Companionship is one of them, and that could mean your community. Like I said, now you're not a couple anymore. Maybe you're not getting invited to go out to dinner with your couple friends, or you might play bridge with a group of people and now you lost your bridge partner. And so now you're not invited anymore. Or you don't want to, or you're invited every time, but you don't want to be the fifth, seventh wheel. So you're kind of losing some of your community, some of your friends. Um, what are some other things? Anybody, again, if anybody wants to pipe in, just throw them in there.
I think security, feeling secure.
Yep. Whoops. What else? Security. I think feeling secure and like maybe even like safety.
Yeah.
Just having having someone in the house, even if it's a pet loss. What if it's, not feeling as secure or safe? It's just changing.
I think routine as well. Working with individuals aging with lifelong disabilities, we may get into a routine of seeing certain people in our home, and that's not there anymore.
Yep. It changes. It can change. Yep.
And that could be a loss for a lot of folks with disabilities if they're in group homes or in some sort of facility and people leave for whatever reason. I know some of our residents at the Virginia home, when a staff person leaves or retires, often, they go through grief.
Mm-hmm. Yep. What else? What are some secondary losses? Here's one. This might be someone, whether they have a loss of health, like hearing, they're losing some independence. Whether let's say that there is a death and now they're losing a little bit of independence. Because maybe that's the person that made dinner every night, or that was the person that did the bills every day. I hear constantly, people say, oh, I bet the widows have such a hard time when they didn't know much about their financial business, and it's just really hard for them because they don't know how to pay bills and do all that. And the other side of it is that I say it's just as hard for some of the men, and I don't mean to gender role, but this is just what I actually hear with people's words is I don't know how. I've never eaten dinner by myself. I've never made a meal by myself. I don't know how to do laundry. I don't want to do these things. These are things that I did with someone or with my partner, or my partner did for me. So you kind of lose that independence because you're going to have to ask for help for some of it, right? Yep.
So Jennifer, I would just say my wife and I every once in a while talk about that. Neither one of us, whichever one of us goes first, the other one will be totally lost on different things. She would be lost on computer and thing, and I would not be able to find a thing in the house.
That's right. It's whatever that is, that relationship is with that person. And I think that you bring up an excellent point there. The other one is hopes and dreams. You know, we have plans. We have plans for traveling the world when we retire. We have plans for, you know, going to our loved one's high school graduation. We have plans for all of these things that we thought were going to happen that maybe aren't going to happen this way anymore. That they're, you know, you have to reimagine what that's going to be because those things change. All right. Let's see. Okay, I want to ask, what does loss feel like? All right, so what does loss feel like? I'm going to get you to use your feeling words, but what are some, what does it feel like in your body? What does it feel like? Can anyone pipe in?
Heartache.
Sorry, heartache?
Heartache. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Numbness.
Empty.
Sorry. What did you say?
I said numbness, just feeling numb.
Yep. Numbness. What are some feeling words?
Fear.
Yep. Lovely. Fear. What else? Go back and look at the list. If you had any of those experiences, death, divorce, loss of a job, loss of your health, what would that feel like?
Shock.
Shrunk?
Shock.
Shock. Good one. Mm-hmm.
Corey in the chat noted emptiness.
Yes. Emptiness. Excellent. I'm such a great speller. You guys really have, this is great for me. Emptiness. How about this one? I'd have to spell it right for you to know what it is. But how about this one? Can everybody see that? Guilt. Why might that
Definitely.
be?
I know after my mom died last summer, I felt a lot of guilt that she went through a lot of pain and felt like that there should have been something else I could have done. Whether or not I could have, I don't know. But, you know, could have said something else to the doctors that could have helped or anything like that.
Yep. That is extremely, a lot of people talk about that. There's another reason for guilt. Because relief. Now, why would someone feel relief? And then guilt on top of that. So the relief might be if you know, took care of your mother for, you know, a couple of years and you watched her suffer and be miserable. And she wanted it over and you wanted it over. And by the time she finally passes, you feel relief. You feel relief for yourself. And then you feel relief for her pain. And sometimes what that ends up leading to is then guilt for people. They think, well, why am I feeling relief? I shouldn't feel relief. Something's wrong with me. I feel relieved. And people think then that causes guilt and all kinds of other feelings. Any other feeling words anybody wants to throw out there? Anybody ever heard of like people having physical pain? The first person mentioned heartache up here. Okay. And yes, your heart hurts, but sometimes it hurts in your stomach. Sometimes it hurts in your limbs. You can literally feel the pain kind of in your joints, like burning a little bit because you're that upset. You get a lump in your throat, physical lump in your throat. Everybody heard of that? These are like physical pain that people feel from some kind of loss. All right, we are going to, and what's important about thinking about all of the things that we just talked about is number one, just normalizing it, that these are all things that people think about. Okay. And I think that we leave out the secondary losses. I think it's really important if someone is grieving, when you look at what your loss is, make a note of what are the other things that you're losing because of that loss. What are your secondary losses? Let's make that list of like what your personal list is. And then let's look at what you physically feel, or like what you're feeling. What does that loss feel like? And have them describe kind of what that feels like. It seems really simple, and it's kind of stuff that we know. But it's also not something that we really take time to give space to. Does that make sense? I'm going to flip over to back to here. And this is kind of what is loss, we talked about. And then what is anticipatory grief? We talk about that a little bit, and really and truly, I think I don't want to get too mired down into the details of anticipatory grief. I think that the easiest way, the quick and dirty way to say it, is that it's grieving the loss before a loss. So it's knowing that someone is deteriorating. It's knowing that you're going to get a divorce. It's knowing that your life is going to change once you have a divorce, and you're not going to have your kids maybe on holidays. It's thinking about all of those things and grieving them kind of before it actually happens, thinking it through more rationally, but you're still going through grief. All the things that we just talked about, you're still going through that process. And I think that what people think sometimes is, well, if I grieve the loss before it happens, I'm not going to grieve it afterwards. And that unfortunately is not the case. It may be different, but it is not going to be, you don't get to skip it. We would love to all skip, in the US, we'd love to skip some pain, but that doesn't really happen for us. So anticipatory grief also gives a balance of like letting go, but holding on to. It's like living in this weird in between time of having like, how do I have hope, but also be realistic and let go? So for example, it's kind of the time between diagnosis and death. I hear a lot of people who've had, a diagnosis, a cancer diagnosis. And I hear them say, well, I want to be the 4%. What if I'm the 4% that leaves? I want to have hope. And their family says, well, when you give up hope, it's over. Like once you give up hope, like you're not going to get better. And so we get people to really fight because we feel like they can, fight through the cancer, or fix the diagnosis, or, fix through this stuff. But you also have to be, and I think that those are all great things to have hope. But I think that also recognizing that maybe the hope needs to look a little different. Maybe the hope isn't that this person is going to live for the rest of their, until they're 100, but maybe they're going to live through the next 2 years. What can we do to make those 2 years great? What can we do to make that time, like maybe shorten that time a little bit, but have it be realistic in terms of being hopeful, but also being realistic as to what the person is or is not going to be able to do. This is just going through the secondary losses that we talked about. Common experiences. So anticipatory grief, all the things that we talked about, what grief feels like is very similar to anticipatory grief. It can be everything from trying to isolate yourself. And the difficult part with grief at all is that one person might want to really talk and one person doesn't want to talk at all. And how do we find that? How do we figure that out for that person? Like what works for them? And to be honest with you, really, when we get people to recognize what they need, like making that list of, hey, what is my loss? What is my secondary loss? What do I feel? What do I need? Having them, what do I want and need from my family and friends? Because we can't guess, and everybody's different and the relationships are different. I'm going to grieve my mom different than I grieve my dad. It doesn't mean that I love either one of them more than the other, but they're different relationships, right? And it also is going to depend on, when they go and what time and, in their lives and what time in my life. So it's different for everybody. It's different for every experience, and it's different for every grief. Everybody's different in terms of that and how they grieve. This is what we talked about, anticipatory grief. Okay, so moving on to understanding. We've talked a little bit about it. What I love is that if you looked up, there's 8 million, everybody's got a stage or a theory of attachment or, different ideas of understanding what grief is and putting labels on it and everything. But to be honest with you, I think as lay people, that what people can really understand more is that what they hear people saying is that people see this, oh, I'm going to go through this little ups and downs. I don't know. Can you see me moving my cursor through here? I'm not sure, but so what you expect to experience, which you will hear people say a lot, is, oh, well, time will heal all wounds, and in time you're going to feel better. And so that gives people the thought that, oh, each day is going to get a little bit better and I'm going to feel better. And I'm going to kind of go on this trajectory of, I'm going to start it down here. And then every day is going to get a little better. And gosh darn it, in a year, I'm going to be better. And you hear people say other things like, oh, once you get through all those firsts, it's going to be a lot better. Well, the interesting part is that it's really difficult for people who are grieving. Number one, they come to expect that they're going to hit this year mark and it's going to be over, that their grief is going to be better, that they're going to feel better. And if you actually talk to grievers, what you're going to hear, and when I use the word grief, again, this is any kind of loss, is that what you would hear from them is that they would say that their second and sometimes even third year is sometimes the most difficult. And when they use the word difficult, they would say because they're still grieving. They thought they were going to be over it. So their expectation was that they were going to be finished and done with this. And the people around them, honestly, they're kind of sick of hearing about it. They're kind of sick of seeing you cry, and and they love you and they care about you, but they've kind of moved on, and they kind of expect that because of what they've learned about grief, that time heals all wounds. They expect you to be better. So a lot of times year 2 and 3 can be more difficult because of the expectations that we put on that. So really, honestly, learning about it, I do a lot of classes, to be honest with you, teaching people how to support their family and friends in grief. And I literally go through this exact same information with them. And it's so that they can learn that maybe they shouldn't say those things, or maybe they should, support people in a different way than they thought they should. The experience that people get is this crazy, it says anger, depression, acceptance, denial, bargaining. I mean, those are old terms from, Kubler-Ross. But to be honest with you, if you took all of the words that we used in describing what grief felt like, you could draw that little, this little squiggly line, and that could honestly represent a one day. It might not represent a year or 2 years or 5 years. It might represent one day. They might be feeling guilty and sad and empty and lonely and relief all in the same day. So we have to really be careful not to, set expectations on others, but also on ourselves on like what your grief is going to look like or feel like. What I like to do is talk about how do we grieve? What are the 6 needs of grieving mourning? This was not a Jenny Moss development. I stole this from Dr. Alan Wolfelt. Most of you know him, have probably heard or seen him before. But I really do like these, because what I think is important, and what I do with a lot of people who are working with grievers, is let's take all 6 of these things. And when you're working with someone, what is something you can do under each one of these? Okay. What can you do to help acknowledge the reality of that, of the death? Okay. Now, what does that mean? That could mean a ritual. That could mean, of course, it could mean a funeral or something like that. But that could also just mean, hey, let's acknowledge that this person isn't here. Let's talk about the things that you're going to lose out on not having this person here. And let's not try to pretend like it's going to be all hunky dory. Moving towards the pain and the loss, we as people who support people, we try to talk about the weather and dance around and tell funny jokes and say things like, oh, well, at least you don't have to buy a Father's Day gift this year. You saved that money. Well, we try to be funny and we think that we're trying to help someone or somehow, and, we don't say it to be mean. But think of how that lands, because people say that stuff all the time. You have to really think about how that lands on someone. So not pretending that it's not there, moving towards the pain and the loss. Continuing the relationship with the person who's died through memory. This is one of my favorites. I think this is someone that when you're working with someone, when you're working with a family, when you have a friend who's had a loss, or yourself when you've had a loss, whether that is, I have a couple of people tell me that they kept their husband's cell phone active and they would text every night. At the end of the night, they would just text their husband different things about the day, or they'd text him throughout the day. And this person did this for a year, that they just kept that going, that they should just needed a minute to communicate, even though she knew it wasn't going anywhere. I've heard people. Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but can you go to the slide that you're reading off? Will we see the Word document still?
You do? Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I'm glad you brought that up. Hold on. You're sharing your screen. Hang on a minute. Bear with me. And let me edit this. Sorry about that. And now it's off. Let me start over. Here we go. Okay.
We're still seeing the Word document.
Right now you are?
Oh, now it just changed.
Okay. So these are the stages of grief. So you probably didn't understand what I was saying when I was going through all of this wonderful stuff. Here is how to grieve. Acknowledging these are the 6 needs of grieving. Acknowledging the reality of death, moving towards the pain, continuing the relationship with the memory of the person who died. And this can be done through, like I said, the text messaging, journaling, writing letters to the person who has passed, but also just, when you have, maybe it's their birthday and you make a birthday cake, for that person, continuing to celebrate those little moments, your anniversary, things like that. Developing a new self-identity. I know this is, scary to think about, but when we went back and talked about all of the other, the secondary losses of all of these things that we have to redefine ourselves. That's what I kind of like to call it, is we're redefining what we are. Maybe not, I think it's a little more scary to say we develop a new self-identity, but redefining ourselves. What are going to be our future plans? If our husband can't be there, what is our next option? If our husband can't walk our daughter down the aisle, who's going to be that person? Who am I going to make that relationship with? Who am I going to travel with? Who am I going to do these things with? How is it going to look? What am I going to do differently and new? Does that mean does not mean you're not grieving that person? It just means you have a new you. We talked about loss of companionship and your your couple friends. Now you don't have your couple friends. You're going to have to make new friends. And it may be a widows group for a little while. And it may be something like that for a little while, or, getting involved in a mentor program, all kinds of different things. Searching for meaning. I think this one can mean a lot of different things. This does not mean finding the reason and defining why that you had this loss. This is really more searching for meaning within yourself, kind of like the creating your new identity. I've heard people say, I want to make my mess my mission. And I definitely stole that from someone else who said that. But maybe you lost a child to suicide, and now you want to put on a suicide walk, or for prevention, or now you've decided to give a part of your life in a different way to give meaning to that loss, whatever that might be, to give back, to volunteer, to find your gratefulness, that kind of thing. And then the other one is receiving support from others. And this can look different for everybody. Some people, like we talked about earlier, some people want to be left alone and they don't want to be asked questions. Some people really want someone to talk to. The unfortunate part is when we're dealing with grief and loss, we have to ask those people, what do you need? Like I can give you guys these 6 needs of grieving, but that person's going to have to, this is them. They're going to have to figure out what it is that they do need. And unfortunately, it goes back on them to try and, hey, what is it that I need and what can help me? How can I be supported? Grief is not a problem to be solved. I want to say this one in terms of, this one is also really big with the loss of, or just a diagnosis or some kind of loss of health or something like that. Your friends can't solve that for you. You lost your hearing, your friends can't help you. No one can help you do that. It's something you have to go. We can't solve that. We can't take away your grief. We can't take away your sadness. And what I find a lot is that we, as very caring, loving friends and family members, try to do that with our words. And we end up kind of saying the wrong thing. I'm going to go, let me see if I can flip this easy. I can go back to, where is it? Nope. It's not what I wanted. I wanted this one. Okay. So what are some things, has anyone had any kind of a loss? What are some things that people have said to you that hurt your feelings, that you thought were inappropriate, or maybe they shouldn't have said? And I'm going to also say, all right, I'm going to say that I'm going to preface this by saying, there is not one thing that you can put on this list that I have not done or said at some point in my life. And it is not because I don't have a heart, and it's not that I don't have the training. It's because we get a little mixed up in ourselves and we say things because we're trying to solve this problem and fix things for people. We really want to be helpful. And sometimes it's the people that overly want to be helpful that just say the wrong things sometime. So what is something that someone has either said to you when you had a loss that you're like, really? Or that you've said to someone else that you really felt later like, oh, I shouldn't have said that, or that you've heard before? Give me something.
Stacy put in the chat, you weren't that close to him, were you?
Okay, great. Excellent. Give me another one.
They were old anyway.
Oh, I love this.
They lived a good life.
Yeah. You need to take time to grieve.
What, tell me about that one.
Okay, so I might be at fault for saying this to people that I care about, because they lost someone very close to them and it didn't seem to faze them emotionally.
Oh, you're thinking that they didn't. Oh, whoops. Okay. You need to take time to grieve, meaning that they haven't.
Right.
Got it. You're making a judgment that they haven't that they haven't grieved. I get it. Okay.
Yep.
What else? These are great ones. These are better than mine. I've got a whole long list.
You should be over your grief by now.
Yep. I'm going to add this one. time will heal all wounds. We talked about that earlier. Um,
They're in a better place now.
oh,
Yeah.
aren't they?
God needed another angel.
Oh, yes, these are a good one.
Like you're good at this.
Yeah, I had to deal with this as a chaplain.
Yes. What else? I've got a bunch of them. Well, he smoked, right?
Mhm. I
Okay,
was their time. That's a good one.
what'd you say?
Corey said it was their time.
It's their time, right? You should be, this is, Okay, I'm going to give you the biggest, the one that, this is a hack. Okay, here's the hack. Don't say at least. That's an easy one, at least, because that nothing good starts with at least, because that's, at least he lived a long life. At least he's going to live with the angels. At least, you had him for, however many years. At least, I've heard for loss of health, at least you lost weight. At least you have another leg. At least you have another child.
They no longer have to deal with their disability.
At least you have your life back, right? That's exactly right. Anything that comes with at least, we really want to, it's just the easiest way to think of it in your mind. If you're thinking that at least comes in any play, you're like, oh, I better stop. Here's another one that I struggle with this one. I'm going to tell you. How are you doing? Okay, this is a double-edged sword. Of course, we want to know how people are doing. Be careful using this because I have used this in the wrong place. Now, I walked into a gal that I work with. Her mother died by suicide. And I said, I said, how are you doing? And then I'm like, okay, wait, hold on. I'm going to rephrase that. How are you doing coming back to working in a funeral home after the loss of your mom? Okay, that was the question I meant to ask. I tried to shorten it by saying, how are you doing? How are you doing did not land well because she's like, I lost my mom by suicide. How well do you think I'm doing? Right. Right. But what did I mean to say? I meant to say, like, how is it I think it's those extra words and really defining it makes it different and it lands differently. Let's make a list of what we should say, because I think now what stresses, this was the other one. The other big one was, okay, here's the one. Nothing. When you see the person in the grocery store or, you see them, whatever. Now we don't need to talk about it every 5 seconds, but we have to acknowledge the elephant in the room that, this person has had a loss. Their life is different. It has changed them. When we say nothing, it really makes it difficult for the relationship. Meaning, if Mike had a loss and I just pretended like it didn't exist, it would be odd for us to continue that friendship, because at some point, if I didn't say something about it, either we just wouldn't be as close or it would be uncomfortable for both of us and we both kind of go our separate ways, right? So saying nothing is not the right thing either. Now, the problem is I've told you all the things that we should not say and all the weird things that people say. And now we don't want you to be scared so that you do say nothing. So we want to say, what should we say? All right. What are some things that we should say?
I would say there are times to say nothing, but not when you're in the store somewhere like that, is to be there for someone and just sit with them, whether they want to talk or
Absolutely.
not.
I guess when I mean nothing, I mean not acknowledging it.
No, I agree. No, I
Yeah.
agree with you on that.
Yeah. Here's the long list. I think you can see it now of what not to say. I mean, there's all kinds of ones that people say. Oh, here's the other one. At the bottom, it says, I know exactly how you feel. I lost my husband too. Well, guess what? No, you don't. You don't know. I struggle with this. We run a widows support group. Okay. And I have some of the widows saying to the other ones, I know exactly how you feel. None of them know exactly how each other feels. They definitely have similar feelings at similar times. They definitely know that they both are going through struggles, but you don't know the relationship that they had with that person. And then, and in the company that you're in, you don't know if a parent lost two children, you don't know the difference. You do not know the relationship that they had and how they exactly feel. So we have to be careful. And I struggle getting them to say, hey, we just remember, we don't know how we exactly feel. We feel similarly or have had similar feelings at times, but we don't know exactly how they feel. And okay, moving on to what to say. Here's the cheat sheet. And you can talk to me about your mom whenever you want. Okay. Your grief reactions are normal and appropriate. You aren't going crazy. The biggest one that I think is important is tell me about, tell me about, Stacy. I didn't really know her. What were your favorite times with her? I think that what happens is we get so caught up in not saying the person's name or not talking about it because we think they're going to forget, or we don't. I've heard people say, well, I didn't want to remind them. And I'm like, oh, yeah. Well, guess what? You didn't remind them that they lost their child. They knew, they remember. Okay. Just because you said that person's name does not mean that you just brought it up and they just remembered it. And that's kind of what I mean when I'm talking about saying nothing. Is use the person's name. But getting others to use that person's name, it feels it's more relatable for you and for the other person that you're talking to. Even saying, tell me more about your mother. Nah, you know what? No, tell me more about Jane. I want to know about Jane. What were your favorite times? That is something that when we talk about going back to those 6 needs of grieving, creating, memories of that person, creating, having them live on, it's telling those stories. I know that when my husband's mother died, and this was 10 years ago before I was in this job, and he must have repeated to me 40 times how he walked in and found his mother. And at some point I was like, okay, you've told me that I already know this. I already know. You've told me this like 10 times. And then I'm thick and sometimes I have to think things through a little bit. And I realized that was cathartic to him. Just telling that story over and over again. And it didn't matter that it was the same story. It didn't matter that I've heard the milkshake story 50 times. He needed to talk about it. And it just started that conversation. So what are some other ones? We remember him and speak about him often. We were just telling, that's another thing is I was just telling a story about Jane the other day and how when you brought her to the park and they played with my son, just telling those little stories. Or I remember when you were so stressed out running back and forth to, try to be a good mom. I just remember those days, and it was really funny when you wore different shoes, whatever it is, but just talking about it, it's opening that door of conversation. Let's see. I'm sorry for your loss is good. I will tell you that grievers will say that they're tired of people saying, I'm sorry for your loss. Okay. They're not tired of it. It's just one of those things where it starts to become this, I'm sorry for your loss. I'm sorry for your loss. I'm sorry for their loss. So what I will tell people is say, I am so sorry for what you're going through for the loss of your mother. Okay. It's just a few more words, but it is way more meaningful than just, I'm sorry for your loss. Again, if you can if you knew the person's name, throw that person's name in there or just something about that person. It really makes a difference to the person you're talking to. We won't forget him. He was such a special kid. These are the things I remember about him. I really don't know what to say, but I'm here to listen. I think that that's a great thing to say, but I think you also have to offer them some prompts. They don't know what to say either. This is new to them too. Most of the time, we don't have a multitude of losses in our lives anymore. So we don't even know what we need. So being there and actually using that person's name, but giving them some prompts. When I teach a class, I teach an obituary writing class. And don't freak out. I know I work for a funeral home, but it's really a fun class. It's really just a life review, and people write their own obituaries. And one of the things, the hacks at the end that I will tell people is, we get scared of death and we get scared of going to funerals. Let me give you a hack. Read the obituary in detail and research about that person before you go to the funeral. Here's why. You may only know one person in that family that you were close with that lost that loved one. Okay. But now you're meeting aunts and uncles and grandparents and other people you've never met before. And instead of just saying, I'm sorry for your loss, I'm sorry for your loss, I'm sorry for your loss, you take the obituary and you can look at it. And even if you didn't know a lot about that person, but you knew something about the person that you're going, to support, read something about it. Oh, wow. I didn't realize that, that your mom was so into gardening. That makes a lot of sense because your garden is so beautiful. Like, how simple is that, right? It's just something that you pulled out and took the time to pull out of the obituary to read about their mom. And you may have never even met their mom, okay? But you've now said something that's meaningful. So that's a little hack on the side of if you are going to a funeral, what to say, what not to say, and how to kind of get conversations started. Some strategies. Here are some strategies, and I'll give you guys this so you don't have to write it all down. I can share this with you if you'd like. I think that these strategies are for people who are grieving and people who are supporting people grieving. So these are important things because they don't know what they're feeling when they've had a loss, and really helping them. That's something you can do to help them, is to really help them figure out what they're feeling and what they need. What is it that you need? Everybody calls and says, what can I do to help? I'm here to help. I'm going to bring, and people say, oh yeah, I know. I'm not supposed to say I'm here to help. I'm supposed to say, I'm going to come cut your grass. Well, guess what? Maybe she doesn't want you to cut her grass. Number one, someone sit down with that person. What are the things that they need? And also, it doesn't have to be a physical thing that you do and paying for the person to get a maid, or, getting them, dropping off a casserole. They may not need that kind of stuff. But what was really helpful, that is the most important, thing that if you talk to people who have been grieving, and they will tell you the thing that landed on them the most importantly, and that made the most difference in them when they were going through grief, is the stories, is the letters, is the pictures, is the photo albums, it's the videos, it's all the things of their loved one that you can share. So when you're writing, I tell people, again, I teach the class on, what do you write in a sympathy card? What are you saying to people? Hey, one of the things that this gal that has come to one of my groups has said, when her father passed, he was in the police force. His partner sat down and wrote her a 6-page letter of all the things that the partner did that she had no idea about, that her dad did with this partner at work. And that 6-page letter was more meaningful than the 95 casseroles that got dropped off at her house. That she kept that letter and she reread it, and it's just the stories and the memories, and it's that they exist. Part of this, again, when you've got working with people with disabilities, that they had a personality, that they had a life, that they had funny things about them. Giving those people, if you're working with a family who loses a loved one, tell them something that they didn't know about their loved one. They would love that. They would love that story. So those are some things that you can do. Also, this is something different. This is about rituals. I'm going to skip that. And this is about funerals, and I'm going to skip that. Okay, here we go. And this goes back to what Mike said earlier about how, yes, sometimes you do say nothing. I call it ventilation and validation. So what that means is I just listen. I like to listen to the person. Now, I do think you have to give them some prompts. Tell me a story about your loved one. What's been the most challenging through all of this? What's been the most helpful through all of this? What do how does it feel? How have you been feeling lately when you had to go back into the Virginia home for the last time and your loved one wasn't there? How did that feel? Like, give them a prompt. And then guess what? You just sit back and you let them talk, and you just have to listen. And you know what you don't have to do? What we have to remember as caregivers, and I am the number one person because I am a fixer, is to try and fix what they're saying and fix what they're feeling. You don't have to. You just have to let them talk. You just listen. You just have to listen. And then when I say validate, that does not mean fix. That seems really hard. Wow, I didn't know that. My favorite memory of my loved one. I wish I had the right words. But I really care, and I love hearing these stories. I don't know how you feel, but I want to hear more about your loved one. And try really hard to not fix it for anyone. Because guess what? The fact is we try to, when I say fix, we want to make the person feel better. And if you're doing these things and letting them talk and validate, they are going to feel better. They just aren't going to really know it. I have a friend that I live with in the neighborhood who lost her father recently, and we go on walks, and I don't say a thing to her, but I know that, she'll say, oh, I'll say, your dad's birthday's coming up, right? And she'll go, mm-hmm. And I'll say, what did you used to do to celebrate his birthday? And guess what? I don't say another word for that walk. First of all, I'm huffing and puffing, and she's great and easy. So, she's walking and talking about her dad the entire time. And guess what? I didn't fix anything. I didn't do anything. I just listened, and guess what? I was intentional about it. She doesn't know that I was intentional about it. She didn't know I had that plan for us, but I did. And I know that, here's the thing. She never said anything to me about it, but I know that it helped her to have someone just to talk to. Okay, these are some practical tips. This is something different. This is another group that I work with, but this is just the listen, listen, listen. You guys know this. We just talked about this. And then just additional strategies for professionals. Educate the person. Have them, do some education themselves. They might privately need to just look some stuff up. The magical moments, creating magical moments. We might have to have, if people will say things like, oh, what's their last wish? Well, what is it, that company that does the wishes for children? I can't remember. Make-A-Wish. And some people will say, oh, there's a Make-A-Wish Foundation. Oh, we can go to Disney World. Well, guess what? You're dealing with people that might not be able to go to Disney World for a multitude of reasons. They might not be for a multitude of reasons, but maybe you can do a slideshow of Disney World. Okay. So you're redoing the hope, whatever it is, that it might just look differently. It doesn't mean you can't have those magical moments with the person. You bring in the goofy ears, and, you show them a video, and you have lunch with whoever, what's her name? Cinderella. Those are easy things that you just have to make them work in smaller ways, and help the family do that as well. Any last minute thoughts? That is kind of my spiel and what I have for today.
Jennifer, a couple things.
Yeah,
please. I would say I would add having, working with the residents here, because I know a lot of folks that'll watch this are working with people with disabilities is that I have to remind them that there's no timeline on disability on grieving,
Mhm.
because I have residents who will come and tell me they miss their mom who died 15 years ago
Yeah.
or more. I also sometimes I'll ask them to say, tell me what was something fun or funny that your mom or your dad did. I've also found, and still trying to work the best way to do this, is it's also important when a resident anywhere dies or someone works with closely, it's important to also recognize the grief of the staff.
Mhm.
And I'm still working the best way to do that, but I started putting a book on the floor where that resident lived and giving people a chance to write out memories of them. And that seems to be important for a lot of our staff now when
Mhm.
we have a resident die.
We deal with that. Obviously, I work at a funeral home, so we are losing people a lot. And there are people that we might have served the family for, 30 years. So we've made a relationship with that person, kind of like your staff has as well. I will tell you that one of the things that I feel like helps our staff is really ritualizing that. So, and you can do that as simple as we have a rock garden where when you lose a loved one, we have paint pens and they write the names of the person. And it could be 15 different people writing the same name, but that feeling of writing the person's name that you miss, and it can just say, somebody I miss today is, and they write a rock, and it could be someone outside, someone that they're grieving. Might be a staff person that they're grieving outside the business, has nothing to do with it, but it might be someone that they've worked with before. But it gives them a minute, literally just those few seconds to write, color it, make it the colors that they want, think about that person, and then just put that rock. We literally just have like a clear glass, huge thing that we put all the rocks in. But somehow ritualizing that, we've done the link chains before back in, okay, I know well, Mike, you've got to know what this is. The card or the colored paper that you make the chains,
Yeah.
you write the person's name on it and you staple them. Okay. All right. Well, I wasn't sure if the younger generation knew what those were, but any of those things. And I know that what I think is important is not, Mike, you doing that for everybody that you've lost in the company. It's letting the people who miss someone, who am I missing today? Letting them write that, even if it's just writing the person's name. It's that minute. It feels good. One of the other things we do have at Bliley's is we have what's called a living memorial. And again, this was one of those things we created for families to put the picture up of their loved one, take a rock, leave a note. It's interactive. There's 15 different things that they can do. Leave a rock, color a rock, blah, blah, blah. And we did it thinking that families would use it. And some of them have. But what has been very interesting is the number of staff that have used it, and that they will, sometimes we have those little battery operated candles that are sitting on the table. And if you're feeling like a little sad that day, you just walk by and you cut it on for that person and you walk away. And it just gave you that minute to think about that person,
I use electric candles a lot for that too.
Yeah.
I take some up to the floor and also will leave some in our chapel.
Yeah, it's such a lovely way. It just takes 2 seconds, but it really does give you that minute to just, remember that person. And then you got to go on with your 80 million things you got to do that day. So yes, those are all, great things. Yep. Anything else? Thoughts, feelings, emotions? All right.
Well, I think this is extremely helpful, Jennifer. I'm new to gerontology, and I'm very interested in how to help people, especially people who might not understand death so easily. So people with disabilities or cognitive impairment. So I love all the things that you shared today, and I can certainly figure out ways to adapt it for clients I work with.
Oh, wonderful. That's great. Yeah. And I'm happy to send you my materials as well. So,
Please, I'd love to see your presentation.
Sure.
Go back to it.
Okay, great. Absolutely. Well, and also you missed half of it. So I didn't realize that you couldn't see my screen. Well, thank you
Oh,
very much.
it was great.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Well, thank you, Jennifer. This has been great. We really appreciate all that you've done today and helping us. And thanks for everybody who has joined us. And please join us again on June 9th. We will have Eleanor Jones from Honoring Choices. We'll be here to talk about advanced directives. So I hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.